Everybody talking about David Brock, author of the bestseller Blinded by the Right, about his years as a right-wing operative, has written a piece. I knew Brett Kavanaugh during his years as a Republican operative. Don't let him sit on the Supreme Court. We were part of a close circle of cynical, hard-right operatives being groomed for much bigger things. Good morning, David.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And thank you. You did go on to bigger things. Media matters, and come more importantly, you came into the light, David, and welcome.
Thank you.
Listen, there already seems to be a zillion reasons Brett Kavanaugh should not be on the Supreme Court, including that he just committed perjury, 4 or 5 times?
Yes. Yeah, right. There's no question that he was misleading and to the committee, both in the Supreme Court hearings and when you go back to his confirmation to the appellate court, new emails have come out that show that he was lying then as well. My piece isn't about his views. I don't hold his views, but my piece is about his behavior and his character and things that I saw Brett do and say back in the 1990s. And the reason I wrote it was, I was watching, just like everybody else last week, when he came out in his opening statement and he portrayed himself as a neutral, impartial arbiter and said he was independent and said he was an umpire calling balls and strikes. And that's not the Brett Kavanaugh I knew. He's coming out of right field.
Yeah.
He was a pretty hard right operative. So was I. A whole coterie of us were. And as I said, and I can go into it, I saw some things that he did that I think are disqualifying. Unethical behavior, for example, while he was working on Ken Starr's staff as a prosecutor. Bob Mueller is kind of an example of a prosecutor who's dispassionate, finder of fact. But back then, Brett Kavanaugh was leaking information from the Starr investigation into the press to make the Clintons look bad politically. And that's not what you expect in a prosecutor. That's more what a partisan zealot would do. And I think he's hiding behind these judicial robes, but that's not reality.
Yeah, I mean, boy, the one anecdote, of course, you told that everybody was talking about, you said you were at a party full of zealous young conservatives. You're watching Bill Clinton's 1998 State of the Union, and tell us that story.
Yeah, sure. So this was, as I said, there was a whole group of us back in the day who were professionally and socially connected, and Brett was one of them. Another was Laura Ingraham, who obviously is now a Fox News host. And we were at her apartment watching Bill Clinton's State of the Union in 1998. And when the camera panned to Hillary Clinton in the audience, I was standing very close to Brett, and he mouthed the word bitch when that came across the screen. And what was notable about that, obviously, was that he was a prosecutor in Starr's office. And that just stuck in my mind, and this is not a new recollection. I wrote about this in Blinded by the Right back in 2002. And again, it just showed the attitude among the staff of Starr. There was a real obsession with both Clintons, but particularly Hillary. And one of the things Brett did was, people may remember, there was a special counsel prior to Ken Starr who investigated the Vince Foster death and concluded that it was a suicide, and that was a thorough investigation. And yet, when Ken Starr came in, they reopened it. Brett was in the middle of urging Starr to reopen that, and they spent another year and a half and millions of dollars, and they tortured the people around Vince Foster, his family, to conclude the same thing, that it was suicide. So there was that obsession with the Clintons that was, as I say in the piece, it's at least unhealthy.
Well, yeah, and I think, David, it's interesting. You started by saying you're not talking about his views; you're talking about him as a person. But I thought, boy, the calling Hillary Clinton a bitch. Boy, a lot of his views and his rulings certainly are misogynistic, wouldn't you say? I mean, even that he let slip that birth control is an abortion-inducing drug. I mean, it is a little chilling. I mean, that's why there's so many women dressed like handmaids outside these hearings, right?
Right. I mean, it's part of his character, and I think, he's just not leveling with the Senate. He's not being honest. As I said, I've witnessed unethical behavior that may actually have been illegal in the sense of leaking grand jury testimony, for example, from the Starr investigation out into the press, and then he was also involved in the Paula Jones case.
You say he was actually the designated leaker to the press of sensitive information from the Starr investigation, right?
Yes, he was the go-to guy leaking to the press various information, and I wasn't on those calls, but I know in Washington that there are reporters who obviously know all this went on. Now, he was a confidential source, so they're not going to say so, but I can say so because I was in the thick of it. I mentioned the Paula Jones case. That was something that I had a role in the first place in bringing Paula Jones out into the public light, and there was a lawsuit, a sexual harassment lawsuit by Paula Jones against President Clinton. And the Starr people ran far afield, people will remember, from their original charter to look at the Whitewater land deal. And eventually they essentially took over the Paula Jones case. And there was a guy named George Conway who was behind the scenes working to engineer the Paula Jones lawsuit. She had a kind of front group of lawyers, but she also had a secret team that we called the Elves. And George Conway, who is married now to Kellyanne Conway, was the chief elf. And he was the conduit of information into the Starr operation through Brett. Of all the witness testimony that they were gathering in the Paula Jones case, which ended up allowing Starr to set the Monica Lewinsky perjury trap for Clinton, which obviously he fell into, but led to what I consider a really unjust impeachment, and people will remember just a crazy national crisis.
Yeah, I always said
a consensual affair.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, David. I think we may have met then. I was hosting Equal Time with Babe Buchanan on CNBC at that time, and. I mean, I just said it over and over. They should not have been investigating his private life in the first place. And you said it best here. The critical flow of inside information allowed Starr, in effect, to set a perjury trap for Clinton, laying the foundation for a crazed national political crisis and an unjust impeachment over a consensual affair. I mean, and now what we're talking about essentially is an unindicted co-conspirator, someone who many of us believe, we will find out at the end of the day, engaged in what amounts to treason, being allowed to choose his judge, right? Who solely, it looks, based on the fact that not only is he a right-wing partisan hack, but that he believes the president's above the law, right? Diametrically opposed to what he believed when Clinton was president, right?
Absolutely, and I think that his views on the executive, which are definitely outside the mainstream, probably tipped the balance in his selection by Trump, because he was part of a group I write about in the Federal Society that was grooming future lawyers. We were all groomed. We were being groomed for roles in government and politics, the way the right does, and in the media. And he was selected, and now they've really succeeded probably beyond their wildest dreams. But the qualification, one, was vetting through the Federal Society, but I do think these views on executive privilege and power that you're just referencing probably tipped the scales in Brett's, and it is essentially Trump picking his own judge, right?
Yeah. I mean, this is chilling the way you say it. Kavanaugh was not a dispassionate finder of fact, but rather an engineer of a political smear campaign. I mean, the questions he wrote that he thought they should ask Bill Clinton, I can't even read with a bleep button on my morning radio show, David. I mean, and the fact that now he's done a 180, it just seems like hypocrisy is what they specialize in the Republican Party now.
Oh, absolutely. And, who knows whether I can't read his mind or his heart, but the 180 may be, he's been on this path for a long time. We were all, as I say, very ambitious in addition to being doctrinaire. And, it's hard to know if he adjusted his view to make it more palatable so that he could get on this track. But he got on it, and here we are. And, it looks like he's probably headed toward confirmation. But before that happens, I've written a book about this, and I've written other things over the course of the last few years. And I felt I had, relevant information that people should know about Brett Kavanaugh, because the hearings didn't really show Brett Kavanaugh. They had millions of documents, that haven't been reviewed.
We can see why now. The ones we have seen are damning enough.
That's right.
I don't know if you saw the irony that he's been charged already with perjury by a group, and I believe Merrick Garland will be the one hearing the case. Did you hear about that?
I didn't hear about that, no, but I'm familiar with the fact that he, at least 4 or 5 times in these hearings, there's evidence in the emails that have actually come out. You can imagine what they must be withholding. Show that he definitely misled the committee on a number of fronts, including his view on Roe, where he looked the Senate in the eye and said he thought it was settled law, and now there's a memo and an email that says that when there was a reference to settled law, Brett challenged that and said, well, maybe not the case because there are some justices who are ready to overturn it. And I think he's one who will.
David, a couple quick questions before you go. How does it feel that all of these people now have disavowed the Republican Party? You were way ahead of the game, because as we keep saying, Donald Trump didn't just happen. They built this. They are fully the party of Trump now. But, you, as you say, kind of came to the light after being blinded by the right. Ooh, look I got the book title in. But, I mean, I'm just curious how, A, that feels, and B, as a gay man, because you talked about that being part of your whole process, that we're back here again where we could be having a Supreme Court that will take away marriage equality for gay people if he is confirmed.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I think about this a lot, and I'm thankful every time I think about it that I got out of the conservative movement when I did, which was in the late 1990s, because clearly I picked up on some things, the lying, the hypocrisy, the rank opportunism, and the propaganda machine that I was involved in, that I felt at a certain point I just couldn't go forward with because it was compromising my work and my character and my integrity. Those are all things that you see coming into full fruition under Trump. And so I was on a collision course, and I'm glad I got off it because I certainly would have collided now when you've got a lot of conservatives out there who do have some sense of conscience, who are distancing themselves, didn't vote for Donald Trump. And so, I imagine I would have been one of the never Trumpers is where I would have ended up. But, having gotten out when I did, I was able to build another life and make a decent contribution to things after some of the things that I'm not so proud of.
Well, and isn't it, when they're talking about this op-ed and lie detector tests, and it is a White House full of liars. I mean, it's hard to, because obviously they called you, what did they call you, a fabulist? They, of course, called you a liar. You tweeted today, George Conway confirms he knew Kavanaugh. Why deny the multiple conversations we had when you were playing the lead role as Elf in the Paula Jones case? This is the play they run every time, right, is to call everybody else a liar.
Oh, absolutely. The lying, people often ask me, well, aren't both sides the same? You're on the right, now you're on the left, and it's all the same, and it's all just politics. And that's not true. And one of the things that is distinguishing about the modern conservative movement is lying is endemic in the culture. And you see it, most prominently you see it in their media, which I was a part of, but you also see it in their politicians, and now we've got one in the White House.
You finish your piece. I can promise you any pretense of simply being a fair arbiter of the constitutionality of any policy, regardless of politics, is simply a pretense. He made up his mind nearly a generation ago, and if he's confirmed, he'll have nearly 2 generations to impose it on the rest of us. Thank you, David, for speaking out and for writing this, and also for the added gift of Eric Boehlert, who we met through Media Matters.
Yes, absolutely. He's terrific.
Thank you, David. Thanks for speaking out on this. We'll talk soon.
It.
All righty, there he goes. David Brock, come on. Everything is awful. Okay. Did you see President Obama was talking about we can't fight like, they say, we should fight like they do. And I keep saying this too. I'm not saying we have to lie, cheat, steal, but somebody had a good idea that when we get back in power, you can expand the Supreme Court. You could do whatever you want. Yeah. You can expand it to 11 seats. I think that might have been Avenatti. But
make up those 2 seats they stole from us.
Yes. Right? There's no rule. It says 40. And this Kavanaugh thing's not over yet.
No.
Over? Do you say it's over, Sean? It's not over. Was it over? Okay.
Over? Did you say over? Nothing is over until we decide it is.
Yeah. Okay.